Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be talking about my non-fiction TBR stack because I just have a couple of non-fiction books that I'm so excited to read, and I just know that I haven't really been this excited to read non-fiction books in a while. I definitely read a handful of non-fiction books over the past 2 years, but I wouldn't say that I've really been reading books that I found super exciting. And in the past 6 months, just so many different books have come up on my radar that I'm just like, I'm so excited to read this. I'm so intrigued by this. So one of the first books I'm going to talk about is a book that I have already read, and that book is this. This is called Second Skin: Inside the Worlds of Fetish, Kink, and Deviant Desire. I have already finished this, like I said, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I came across this because I occasionally attend this kind of sex positive reading group, and in it it's really nice. It's once a month, and you usually just read a chapter from a selected book. And we read a chapter from this, and it was so interesting. It was absolutely brilliant. I can't actually remember now the chapter that we read, but I've obviously now read it in its entirety, so I've read that chapter. But it was enough to spark my interest. I was like, I'm actually going to purchase this book in hardback, might I add. So yeah, I thought this was absolutely fascinating. So in this, the author Anastasia dives into all different, I'm guessing as many as maybe she wanted to write about, aspects of the kind of fetish world. So there's a contents page, and she dives into leather, latex, dominatrix, the gimp, the chaser, feet, medical gloves, cars, monsters, and fetish club. And it's just really interesting when she describes all the different things. And what's really nice about this is in some parts she includes contributions from other people, so other people talking about their experience of these different I guess areas of kink, why they do it, how it makes them feel. And it's just really interesting because there are some things that you read and you're just like, I have no idea why anyone would do that. And then you're kind of reading it from their perspective and you're like, that's really interesting. And another thing she does really well is kind of, especially with the leather section, there is a lot in there about the history of it and just really kind of where it started in terms of gay men. And there is just a lot of care given to talking about it, but also she talks a lot about the art that might have kind of come as a result of it. So every single time I was in one of the chapters that she would focus on an artist who maybe had an exhibition in terms of maybe leather and latex, or gimp stuff, or feet. She really took the time to identify people who were, I guess, prolific in that area, well known in that area, had done something different in that area, and shine a spotlight on either the work that they have been doing or any of the kind of words or things that they had to say about it. So it was really fascinating. I just felt like it was a really, I would say, fair book as someone who doesn't know a lot about the world, but I found it really interesting. And I think she just gave it such a real, a lot of consideration and care. And I just felt it was just really informative. It felt at a lot of times neutral, even though she is someone who indulges in kink herself and, talks about the different things that she is interested in. They didn't feel like propaganda for kink. It really much felt like a really nice, considerate exploration. I just found it so enjoyable. And there is the bit where she talks about, a lot of this was informative for me, especially regarding things to do with monsters, medical gloves, and things like that. So I do think it's really interesting to see why people are into the things they're into. But then things to do with feet was a really interesting one, because she also then starts to talk about people who collect sneakers, trainers, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess you could kind of put it underneath that kind of similar umbrella. So yeah, found it really fascinating, and 5 out of 5 stars this was for me. I just really enjoyed it. And then something I'm reading at the moment is Radical Intimacy. Really enjoying this. I'm on page 111. I think it's got 160 something pages. Yeah, loads of references. Really enjoying it. Someone mentioned this to me, and I was like, I confused it with the title of another book, and I think it's called Radical Relating. Um, but then they were like, no, it's not that book. And I was like, I looked it up and I was like, this sounds absolutely brilliant. I really want to read it. And it's just so funny when we talk about I think when you see the title Radical Intimacy, you think it's going to be about sex. It's not about sex. It only has 5 chapters, and the first chapter is Your Life in Your Hands. And this chapter really focuses on about community and building community and what it is to kind of, be part of a community, but also extend yourself to other members of your community. A lot of the focus is on kind of mental health and how basically how healing can be done in community, and the kind of disruption that kind of occurs when these kind of brutal acts or institutions get involved in mental health care with, I guess, maybe the aspect of helping, but don't really help. and how that can, make people worse, and especially in relation to minority ethnic groups as well. That one's a really interesting chapter. I mean, I'm reading this book and I'm just like nodding my head along to like so many things because they're just things that I like agree and believe. The second chapter is called Us Two Against the World. So this takes a look at relationships and heteronormative families. Um, well, sorry, yeah, mainly takes a look at relationships, and she very much talks about like the COVID pandemic and when they kind of, were identifying that you have to stay in like your household and things like that, and it's like, well, what makes a family and all those sorts of things. But essentially, is very much focused on monogamy. It is not a book that is advocating for non-monogamy or polyamory or anything like that. But again, it talks about the kind of incentivization of just like being a couple and what that means in terms of like, maybe tax relief, tax breaks and things like that. But then also what like the kind of pressure that might put on individuals, to find a person, and also just about how marriage has evolved over the kind of past centuries. Very, very interesting. Again, I was reading it and I was like, hey, agree. The third one is, I think, the most recent one that I finished, which is They're All You've Got, which talks about family. So I know I mentioned that the second chapter talks about family. It's actually more this chapter that talks about family. And again, things to do with the kind of two-person household, having your 2.2 kids. And again, like towards the end of the chapter, she talks about, care in the community. Like, what would it look like if, people really did like have a village? What would it look like if you extended your care of looking after children to more than just the children, your biological children or your adoptive children? And, you really did spread that kind of care around, maybe with another family and things like that. But again, she also talks about how, again, when it comes to family, there's a lot of talking here about the Conservative government and the things that they want to do to keep the family, but then also the things that they just don't do in order to actually help families. But another thing she talks about here is also harm in families and how that kind of notion of they're all you've got in this world. In a lot of cases, with what we see in kind of heteronormative two-parent households, is a lot of harm done to people, and because a lot of that kind of things is you keep it private and things like that, people quite often are very harmed in their families. But because we tell people that's all you've got and your family is the most important thing, it creates a lot of confusion, but it also allows people to get away with a lot of abuse. Really, really, really fascinating. So the next two chapters we've got is A Ladder is Not a Resting Place and The Great Equalizer. I think A Ladder is Not a Resting Place is going to be about housing. I'm not sure what the final chapter is going to be about, but really, really thoroughly enjoying this one. So the next couple of books that are on my TBR that I'm honestly so excited to read. I can't remember how I came across this one, but this is called Lifting Heavy Things. And I can't believe I've just like never heard of this, but anyway, it says healing, the subtitle is Healing Trauma One Rep at a Time. A celebrated strength trainer and trauma practitioner offers a fresh and empowering approach to healing and thriving after trauma. And I just found it like really, really interesting because obviously we know that exercise is really important for us, and for women, weightlifting is really, really helpful and beneficial, like as you age, especially like as you go into menopause, and it's like important to be like doing these things pre that, to really kind of help with bone density and everything after. Great. But I thought it was a really interesting thing to kind of link exercise to trauma, because when I saw it, I was like, that actually like makes a lot of sense. And when I lift weights, I find it really, really enjoyable because it becomes something the only thing that you focus on, even when you're feeling like in a shitty mood or something like that. You can either finish a workout and feel really great. Sometimes I finish a workout and I actually feel crap, but like I'm still really grateful that I was able to move my body. But it becomes the sole thing that you focus on, and you really just cannot be focusing or thinking about anything else whilst you're in the moment, like lifting those heavy weights. You really have to like think about your body and be in your body. Anyway, the rest of the blurb goes on to say that celebrated trainer and trauma practitioner Laura brings a fresh approach to healing after trauma, using strength training as an embodied movement practice. Compassionate, witty, and fastidiously researched, her debut, Lifting Heavy Things, is a breakthrough title that will empower you to develop develop resilience and build emotional and physical strength through working out with weights while mindful of the way that trauma can compromise the well-being of your mind and body. In this innovative title, celebrated trainer and trauma practitioner brings a fresh perspective approach to healing after trauma, using strength training as an embodied movement practice. And that just makes so much sense to me, especially when we see now a lot of things about embodiment and somatic practices and things like that. I was like, of course, why can't strength training be a part of that? And I think it kind of doesn't naturally feel like it falls into that because you kind of associate maybe weightlifting with kind of like gym bros and people who are into kind of like competing. But obviously, loads of people on a daily basis do strength training, not just for weight loss. But yeah, it says in this book, you'll learn about managing chronic pain, creating conditions for training and healing, understanding how trauma shows up in daily life, using embodied movement practices beyond yoga as a tool to comfortably re-inhabit the body, navigating interpersonal relationships during and after the healing process, why you don't have to tell your trauma story, in brackets, to everyone, and thriving and moving beyond trauma. But I'm intrigued by this. It's got really good like reviews, as well. So I'm intrigued to see what she says because, like I say, it naturally made sense to me when you kind of make that link between like the body and trauma. Obviously, um, we know now a lot more about like kind of how trauma is stored in the body and that kind of movement that is like needed to either like stay in your body but also to kind of allow trauma to like move through your body. So I'm really really interested in that. I just when I saw it I was like, yeah, because obviously a lot of the kind of practices we talk about when they talk about embodiment is to do with like yoga or either just other somatic movements, but definitely there are other movement practices that will be able to help you with trauma as well. It's just, I guess, about like actually thinking about it in that way. Another book that I'm excited to read is my grandmother's hands: racialized trauma and the pathway to mending our hearts and bodies. I've seen this book around for so long, and I've just been like, yeah, I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it like for the past 2 years, and I've never. But this year, I'm going to pick it up. And it says here, the consequences of racism can be found in our bodies, in skin and sinew, in bone and blood. In this groundbreaking, inspiring work, therapist Resma examines the damage, the physical consequences of discrimination from the perspective of body-centered psychology. He argues that until we learn to heal and overcome the generational anguish of white supremacy, we will always continue to bear its scars. Says this book is an extraordinary call to action for all of us to recognize that racism affects not only the mind but also the body, and it introduces an alternative way of what we can do to grow beyond our racial divides. So yes, I'm very very interested in this as well. Obviously, like a lot of these books, like are always kind of recommended now as like an alternative to The Body Keeps the Score. Still a book that I very much and very much credit with just a lot of the realizations that I had around myself and trauma. But I appreciate there are books like this that definitely do a lot more to not kind of like, you know, shame people, are not tied up with someone who might be a bit like, and also focus on the kind of like racial aspect of trauma and maybe that kind of generational aspect as well. So I'm really excited to read this. And I have heard just the way it's written perhaps is all just a little bit more lyrical. I could be wrong on that aspect, but that's the kind of impression that I've gotten. Another book that I'm so excited to read, and this book is Tomorrow Sex Will Be Good Again, subtitle Women and Desire in the Age of Consent. I'm so excited for this. I cannot wait to like get stuck into this one. Again, this is a book that I've seen like over the years, but I think it's really only come to like my attention in the past like 6 months as something that I know I actually personally will enjoy just because of just the things that I can assume. But it says here, women are in a bind. In the name of consent and empowerment, they must proclaim their desires clearly and confidently. Yet sex researchers suggest that women's desire is often slow to emerge, and men are keen to insist that they know what women and their bodies want. Meanwhile, sexual violence abounds. How can women in this environment possibly know what they want? And why do we expect them to? In this elegant searching book spanning science and popular culture, pornography and literature, debates on Me Too, consent, and feminism, Catherine challenges our assumptions about women's desire. Why, she asks, should they be expected to know the desire? And how do we take sexual violence seriously when not knowing what we want is the key to both eroticism and personhood? In today's crucial movement of renewed attention to violence and power, uh, Angel urges that we remake our thinking about sex, pleasure, and autonomy without any illusion about perfect self-knowledge. Only then will we fulfill Michael Fulcott's teasing promise in 1976 that tomorrow sex will be good again. So excited to just read this and learn more about like what she has to say. And yeah, I'm really, really intrigued to see what she's going to talk about in terms of kind of like science, popular culture, pornography, and literature. But also, yeah, around consent and desire and pleasure. I think there are just so many things that are wrapped up when it comes to these things. And before anything, you add on the things to do with like any kind of societal shame or programming, or cultural shame or programming. So yeah, I'm really, really excited for that one. And then the final one that I'm excited to read, again, I've had it on my list for like close to 2 years. The final book I'm going to talk about is Returning Home to Our Bodies, Reimagining the Relationship Between Our Bodies and the World, Practices for Connecting Somatics, Nature, and Social Change. This is from North Atlantic Books, and I really love a lot of their publishing. I love it so much. But yes, it says a body-based healing model that interrogates what we've been wrongly taught about hierarchies of nature and the body and pushes back against white supremacy, colonialism, patriarchy, and the capitalism embedded in modern embodiment practices. Again, so I think, whilst embodiment and somatics has been like really kind of, popular in the past couple of years and things like that, there are obviously people looking at it through another kind of like critical lens of just, as it says here, about kind of colonialism, patriarchy, and how like maybe we can actually start to look at it in conjunction with nature, but just, actually just providing another lens to look at it with. So yeah, it says here, pushing back against consumerist, pleasure-centric somatics industry that privileges product over process. Abigail Rose Clark reminds us that the truly meaningful embodiment practice nurtures our relationship among self, nature, and community. It says, the tools and practices to help us better understand and dismantle the many ways our bodies are weaponized to serve domination systems. Topics covered include harnessing the vitality of curiosity and experimentation, using nature as a guide to possibility, embracing the necessity of difference, exposing the lie of universal isolation, dismantling the fallacy of hierarchy, uncovering the truth of endless capacity, all as a driving force for transformation. So again, this just sounds brilliant. I do follow the author on Instagram as well. So yeah, those are my non-fiction reads that I'm really, really excited to get into. And yeah, after I finish one, I'm just like so eager to get stuck into another one. And yeah, I think I'm just finally finding kind of the intersection of like non-fiction books that actually align with the things that I am interested in, rather than just like non-fiction books that sound interesting and that, I might like to read, but I'm not like that passionate about. And I've just found like the perfect blend at the moment. So yeah, that is it for this video. If like based on this video you have any kind of other non-fiction reads that you think I would be interested, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and also share with me what non-fiction book you are currently reading at the moment. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll catch you in another one.